Welcome to the Means of Grace podcast from the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. I'm Jesse Enniss, and today we're cracking open the tomb of Easter, not only for a theological lesson, but for a worldview overhaul. Easter isn't just bunnies and brunch. It's not even really about getting dressed up to celebrate the empty tomb. It's about hope. It's about staring into the darkness. It's about embracing that season of fear and grief and confusion, and then to realize that God is somehow still breathing on the other side. And so are we. We're talking resurrection today, not as a metaphor, but as a real invitation to see death in a different light. And not just the death that comes at the end of life, but all the little deaths along the way. The death of dreams, of careers, of buildings, of plans, of the way we've always done things. And yes, sometimes the death of ego, of certainty, of the idea that we have to hold everything together. And our guest today is Reverend Dan Pezet. He's the district superintendent of the Metro District, and he's walked with churches through grief, through change, and into something like resurrection. And alongside me, as always, is Reverend John Yeager, co-host, preacher, and someone who never met an irrelevant historical perspective. How you doing today, John?
Oh, I'm doing well. You know why? Because the Gators are still the national champions of basketball.
I think that might last for a little bit. And Dan, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. This is wonderful.
We're glad that you're here. Before we get into our conversation with Dan, here's an update on what's going on in the Western North Carolina Conference as of May 5th, 2025. Annual conference is quickly approaching. We will meet at Lake Junaluska from June 19th to the 22nd. The theme this year is Unity, Healing, New Creation. Make sure to stay up to date on all the AC 2025 news by visiting ac2025.org. Mark your calendars for Friday, May 23rd. It's United Methodist Night at the Hickory Crawdads baseball game. Bishop Carter will be throwing the first pitch, and we will be giving away t-shirts, and United Methodists get discounted tickets and so much more. More info will be coming out shortly, so stay tuned. Equip and Connect is continuing throughout the year with monthly virtual sessions. And the other May session is on May 19th at 6:30 p.m. on cross-cultural and cross-racial ministry. Don't miss out on these conversations. Finally, we lift up Reverend Dr. Mark Rawls, Blue Ridge District Superintendent, as he takes a sick leave over the next few months. We are grateful for the leadership of Reverend Ashley Crowder-Stanley and Dr. John Boggs, who have graciously stepped up as co-superintendents for the Blue Ridge District during Mark's leave. Both have come out of retirement to serve, and we are truly grateful for their selfless leadership. Don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Now back to our conversation with Reverend Dan Pezet. John, you ready to kick us off into a journey of understanding and wisdom?
I am. Easter is a journey. It's not just one day. It kept going. Easter doesn't end on Easter Sunday. It begins there. It bursts out of the tomb with dirt still under its nails. But the story doesn't stop when the lilies wilt and the ham's all gone. That's just when it's getting started. We're impatient creatures. As mortals, have this bizarre tendency to move on too fast from things that matter and to never let go of the things that don't. We cling to traditions, buildings, identities, even pain, long after their season has passed. Or we rush past holy moments like they're items on the to-do list, and Ecclesiastes whispers all along, there is a time for everything. But we either try to outrun time or chain it up in the basement. And that brings us to the ship of Theseus. If you keep replacing the planks board by board, is it still the same ship? If your church changes, if your faith evolves, if your understanding of resurrection deepens, are you still you? Easter says yes. Easter says resurrection isn't about freezing something in time. It's about becoming something new without forgetting who you were. Nothing in nature, in Scripture, or in our gut instinct says otherwise. Trees fall, rivers shift, stars explode. Our cells regenerate until they don't. Kingdoms rise, kingdoms fall. You can light all the candles we want, but we can't outlast the tide. But we're scared, aren't we? We're scared to admit that the Sunday school classroom we painted in '83 might not have another Easter egg hunt in it. Scared that the committee we chaired for 15 years won't meet again. Scared that the hymnal or the style of the style might be fading into the sunset. So here's our setup. Theseus was a great hero of Athens, the kind who slays minotaurs, liberates folks, sails back with swagger and the kind of legendary aura that makes sculptors chisel. But his ship was the thing of glory. After Theseus died, the people of Athens, being sentimental and not wanting to let go, decided to preserve the ship as a monument, a memory, a sacred object. But wood, unlike legend, decays. So they replaced a plank, then another, then a mast, then a rudder, one piece at a time, not all at once, because that would be obvious and seen. Over the years, decades, maybe even centuries, things were replaced. So here's the question. When every piece of wood has been replaced, is it still the ship of Theseus? The philosopher in me would like to answer with a yes, but then it gets messy. Is identity the sum of its parts? Is it function? Is it memory? Is it meaning? Or is it just a story we keep telling ourselves until we forget that it was a story? See, that ship sat in a harbor and people bowed their heads before it. Children asked their mothers, did he really sail on that? And mothers would smile with a yes, even though none of those planks had ever touched water. The story is what survived. Now we walk out of the museum and into our lives. You're not made of the same cells you were born with. Every 7 to 10 years, almost all of your body has been swapped out. Your beliefs? Probably not the same. Your relationships? Evolved. Your fashion sense? Depends who you are. Your playlists may be unrecognizable, and yet you are still you. Why? Because you are the one who remembers, the one who became those things. Change does not mean that something dies forever. You're not static. You are a verb disguised as a noun. You are not the sum of your parts. You are the story. And here's where it gets theological. Jesus rose from the grave, still bearing his wounds. He wasn't the same, but he was still himself. Churches burn down, they get rebuilt. Sanctuaries change carpets. Pews are replaced or swapped out for chairs. Organs go silent. Praise bands show up. Is it still church? If grace is there, then yes. If the story of love rising from death still echoes off the halls, then yes. The resurrection of Jesus is not some loophole in the death problem. It's the divine permission to stop pretending that things last forever, and instead to lean all the way into the gift of now and then more deeply into resurrection. So here's the question. If resurrection is real, and we're saying it is, then it has to show up on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, in a budget meeting, in a hospital room, in a quiet moment when people aren't clapping. So here's the question, y'all. How do we live like resurrection people?
Wow, that's a really great question, John. And I love it when you are talking about theological things, and then you say, now it's time to get theological.
That's right.
And you just go
You
deeper.
like that?
Yeah, that was great.
He's giving away all my secrets. Did you hear that?
The resurrection people, That's been a theme in our history as Christians. Go back to early America. There was a philosopher named William James. He was the father of pragmatism, um, and he was fascinated by Christians. Not a Christian himself, but fascinated by Christians because Christians would be going through some of the most miserable things. They would be sick, hurting, going through suffering, and yet they would be happy. And he couldn't understand, why are these people who have no reason to have joy? Why do they have joy? And they had joy uh, because of their faith. Um, and so when we're living out life as resurrection people, we are recognizing the future hope, the blessed assurance that we have in our salvation, in our resurrection. And we know that the best is yet to come. So that's a big part of living out our lives as resurrection people. It's why people who have cancer can experience joy. And some of the people who have blessed me the most spiritually are those who are going through that kind of
I've
struggle.
given that sermon, yeah, that perspective of being told when your time, essentially, when your time's coming up, and this perspective shift they have. And it's
Yeah.
just, I mean, it makes you cry because you're like, gosh, I wish, how beautiful would it be if we all knew that, this was it, instead of having to have something like that happen.
Yeah. Living into the resurrection.
There's probably people listening right now who feel like they're already halfway in the grave, emotionally, spiritually, in different relationships, maybe even physically. What do you say to someone who feels like they've got nothing left to resurrect?
What comes to my mind there is to remember that it's not our job to do the resurrection. The resurrection does not come from ourselves. That is the work of God. Um, it is the promise of Jesus, who died and lived the resurrection for us. And so it's not our job to do the resurrection. We might not feel it. And when we don't feel it, when it feels like we have nothing left, that's when we lean on God, have conversations with God, and then have conversations with the people that God's placed around you. Um, we are a connectional people, and we have support, and we support each other. And through those connections, we can start to see what we do have, and to know that promise and to feel that love. And even when everything's been stripped away, if we can make those connections, we can feel the connection that we have with neighbor and with God. It's that
Yeah.
beautiful triangle of loving God and loving your neighbor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in that position before where I've spent so much time struggling to let go of what I've lost that I totally miss the connections that I still have. There's something holy in the letting go of what we've loved and lost. Faith doesn't erase the ache from that, and life's not about erasing that ache, but our faith can transform it. The gospel says we can love something fiercely and still let it go, and still be grateful. I guess the more secular way of saying that, it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. But the gospel is saying that, like, even in that loss, we can still be whole. We can still be alive. So, Dan, what's something that you've let go of in your life that you feel like had healed you?
That question sounds formational to me. So I go back to my formative days. Um, I grew up in Central Florida
Woohoo.
and grew up in the time of the uh, some of the most some of the largest advances in the space industry, and was fascinated by NASA. And I always dreamed of being an astronaut. I even found the application to be an astronaut when I was 10, sent that into NASA. They sent a really nice letter back saying that I needed to log hours of flight before I could apply. So the dream was there. And when I graduated high school, I graduated with a full paid scholarship to be an aerospace engineer.
Did not
And
know
so my
that.
first, yeah, little
Yeah.
known fact
That's
about Dan
awesome.
Pezet.
Dan deepens, ladies and gentlemen. Only here on the Means of Grace podcast.
So my first year of college was studying to be an aerospace engineer.
That's cool.
And that whole year I was really miserable.
Mm.
I got to the final exam in Intro to Aerospace Engineering 101, and the question was something about how many times could the space shuttle go around Jupiter's orbit, losing fuel at a cylindrical rate. I was 3 pages into this math problem, and I realized I knew the answer.
Mm.
And the answer was, I don't care.
And I hope someone else does.
Right?
I don't.
That's a problem for someone else these
That's
days,
a problem
and
for somebody
I
else. I
just
love
realized
that.
that was not the problem for me to answer. And so I let it go and changed majors. And changing majors is something that people experience all the time. And for me, that was a catharsis. It was a release. And it helped me to start dreaming about what it is I'm called to do rather than what it was I had a childhood dream of doing, what was realistic for me. And that was a moment of new life.
I love that story because I think a lot of folks would have held on to that just because of how long they had been holding on to it. Just because it's like, well, I spent all this time. And so I love you kind of sharing that, you just decided, you know what, it's not connecting in my heart the way I thought it would. And like you said, there's more of a feeling of catharsis in letting it go than in holding on to it. And I think that's
It's
a
hard
pretty
to
good
let a dream
sign.
die.
It is. It
It's hard,
is.
but your dream was resurrected, if I might be so
Yeah.
corny right now. But that takes a lot of faith, because I mean, when you let go of a dream, maybe I'm alone. I'll just speak for me. I would go through times where I would think, am I ever going to dream again? If you know it, am I ever going to have that kind of
Yeah.
love and dream for something? Yeah,
Yeah.
again, and it takes a lot of faith,
Absolutely.
or foolishness, but it takes a lot of something right there. So let's move this just a little bit into kind of our sphere of Western North Carolina Conference. How can churches, and I'm asking for kind of broad brush here, how can churches, or maybe denominations, if you want to get bold, live into death? I know that's an odd way to put that, but how can they live into ministry as though they no longer fear death? And I'll say one thing and then I'll give it to you, Dan, is I wonder if we are a people now who have been so blessed as Christians in our particular United States context. We've been so unbelievably blessed for so unbelievably long with almost no interruption, right? There's been no just dropout of Christianity and then it comes back because something happened. I mean, it's just been this long stretch. Have we forgotten how to die? So anyways, that was a gigantic question. Spend the next hour on that, would you? And then
Yeah.
Yeah, have we forgotten how to die? Another approach would be to say, as we grew so large as a Christian institution, did we lose some of our authenticity along the way?
Mm.
And are we seeing a correction now? That's one question to ask. And for individual churches and even denominations that are going through this kind of, how do we live into this new place that we find ourselves? I've got several things that I encourage churches to think about. One is to recognize your current reality, and that's important, to just take stock of where you are, what resources you have, and ask the question: can we continue doing the things that we've always done? What needs to be different? And to take that and to also that means letting go of some of what's happened in the past. So I run into churches all the time that say things like, before COVID, we had 400 and now we have 100. And that church is not being fair to itself, because church before COVID and church after COVID are two different things. And so you're comparing apples and oranges. So I encourage churches to think back, how many did you have the Sunday you came back into in-person worship after COVID? And they'll say, well, we had 25. So great, start there.
That's
So
right.
say we had 25 and now we have 100.
And it can be a gift just to start over, to not have that
Yeah,
anchor
yeah,
going, gosh, those big numbers are just dragging me.
right, right. There's when churches um, are resisting their reality, what they're doing is they're thinking back to what their parents' church looked like, what their
Yeah.
grandparents' church looked like, and they're feeling guilty. Like
Yes.
they've
Yes.
left this church to us to care for it,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not caring for it the
Became
way that.
stewards instead of
Right, right,
creators.
right. And where that's unfair to churches is that uh, the church is different today. There was a day and time in those 50s, 60s, 70s where our church planting strategy was buy a lot on a corner, build a church, put a pastor there, and open the doors. If we
Mm-hmm.
build
Yep.
it, they will come. That was our church planting
Oh,
strategy.
yeah.
Yep.
And that no longer works today. So it's a different animal. It's a different process. And so to judge ourselves for how we're leading church today against how people led the church in the 70s and 80s, it's unfair. So
It
one of the
is.
first things that I would say is recognize our current reality and move from here.
Yep.
That's a tall order, right? That perspective change. I mean, yeah, that's so hard. And it's so hard to be the generation or that has to admit some of that. You said it, that it's not that they're feeling guilty. And that runs deep. Um,
Yep.
that runs very deep.
Yep. I think, speaking from personal experience, and Dan, you kind of helped walk myself and a congregation at the missional campus of Assurance, UMC, when I was campus pastor of Connections. We had very difficult conversations for a really long time, like you said, about what needs to change, like what can't continue to go this way. And yeah, we just kind of had to come to the realization that like drastic things needed to change. And I think one of those things was that I personally needed to step away and just kind of come to terms with the fact that like I'm not responsible for, whether or not this church stays open or not. It's much more about how are we living into the call of Christ. It's not a personality thing. It's not hinging on one person. And I think, when the dust settles, we see that we had a ministry that was connecting to the community, and that's the thing that we needed to put all of our energy into, because that was the way that we were connecting to our community. That was the way that people were finding the love of Christ through us. And we just kind of held on to that traditional idea of what the church needed to look like, and split our efforts instead of pouring heavily into that. And now, even though that campus doesn't meet for worship, we are still connecting with the community, and still a vital part of that community in the ways that we are providing resources for folks. And so, and as a congregation, we still get together and meet. Actually, this past Sunday, at the time of this recording, we got together to meet and to celebrate that those are the folks who supported me when I first started in seminary. And so those are the folks who are there to kind of celebrate all that has come over the past 4 years. And, still kind of encouraging, recognizing that like the call to ministry is not only a call from God, but it's also a call that our communities, our churches, our congregations are also speaking life into, and they're continuing to speak life into that. And so, it doesn't look that same traditional way, but there's still a lot of life-giving elements to it. And then even being at Duke, studying under Michael Adam Beck, who is teaching us our essentially our evangelism class, our Missio Ecclesia class. But I'm like, reading the books that we're reading and kind of going through the stuff, thinking to myself, there is no way that this is what pastors and seminary students were learning a decade ago. This stuff is like brand new, but it's changed because our context has changed, our reality has changed, and we need to now look at evangelism totally differently. And like you said, stop weighing ourselves down by the past and start living into our current reality. And it's difficult, but I think there's still a lot of life to be had in there. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse, for your story. Your leadership, by the way, in that death and resurrection was phenomenal.
I appreciate that.
You
Shout
helped,
out Jesse.
yeah,
Man.
you helped lead them in this process that we're talking about today.
I appreciate that. Well, like I said, I appreciate your support and everybody else who had a hand in kind of helping with that. Josh Kurtz and Daniel Wilson, and I don't think I would have been able to do that without the connection. That is for sure. So grateful to be able to lean into the connection for sure. All right, so we're gonna continue the conversation with a moment that we call strangely heartwarming. So John, we're gonna get real for a second. Resurrection sounds beautiful, but it starts with a lot of pain, as we've mentioned. It starts with people hiding behind locked doors, convinced it's over, needing certain types of proof to believe that it's true. What's a resurrection moment in your life, John, that didn't feel like a miracle at the time, but in hindsight, it was?
I had one, but I actually wanted to share one that was more conference related now. So if you don't mind,
Let the Spirit lead you, man.
I know, right? Yeah, that's what we're here for, right? We're believers, I think.
Yeah.
So I went to the Peace Conference and to cover it for a little bit, and I was talking to Beth, and I talked with her, and then when she was on with us last week, she mentioned that the Peace Conference had stopped several years ago, and she had assumed that it was because of COVID, but when she talked to some of the leadership, come to find out, no, it had actually run its 10-year course. That was it. And I mean, I'm a little bit obsessive, but man, that has been on my heart and mind ever since she said it. I was like, I mean, just my head has been spinning with the level of humility, and I don't know, I could probably think of great words, but they all come short of that kind of thought process of going, you know what? Things don't last. And we are all fantastic. Well, not all of us, but many people are fantastic creators. Yeah. And even some then less still are sustainers, but not so many are as good with the death, right? And then believing that something will come out of that soil that 10 years planted. Mm-hmm. So my story was, is there any room for, I was going to say death, for pre-planned or for pre-planned death? Is there any room for that? Is there merit and grace and spirit and divinity in having a starting point and making an end point to something?
I love that you said that. So I love movies and I love TV shows. I think I like to look deeper into what the writers were thinking, what the directors were thinking in creating this art for them. And nothing bothers me more than a show that should have ended seasons ago.
I was hoping that was where you were going. I was like, yes. I didn't even think of this analogy, but this is brilliant, Jesse. Yes.
Like, there might be fans of Lost out there who know that Lost should have ended seasons before it actually did. There's just nothing, for me, there's nothing better than a story that ends when it should have, ends when when the writers recognize that they have told a complete story and that it's okay to let this go regardless of how much more money they could possibly make.
Yes.
I'm so nervous for Ted Lasso.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I said to Amy when she told me. I was like, oh, no. Oh, please.
I know. But it was, to me, I mean, it was a really good ending to Ted Lasso as well.
Well, yeah, but they're coming back. That's
are they coming back?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Just one season, so, you know.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Hang on.
And it was one of the most perfect endings of any
was.
series.
Now I know what you mean. Now I'm nervous too. Yeah, it's like I just watched, if there are any fans of horror movies out there, I just watched a movie called Sinners by director Ryan Coogler, and personally I saw a lot. I mean, it's called Sinners, so I saw a lot of Christian overtones and things like that in it, and I just thought it was a really good movie. And I'm like, man, I really hope they don't make a sequel. Like, I really hope that all this success doesn't make them feel like, we planned on just doing one, but we can make a lot of money here, let's do more. So
yeah,
it makes me nervous too.
So there it feels like, I mean, might I be so bold to say that there is at least some divinity, some sort of wisdom in starting something and fully living into the fact that it ain't going to last forever. How do we do that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Is the reason we haven't done it because that's a real hard sell? I'm opening a new church. We're going to do 20 years.
Yeah.
At the end of the 20, we're going to have to reevaluate. That's all we got. And then we have to either resurrect or... Sounds bold, but maybe scary.
Right. I've been with churches that have had the annual barbecue for so long that they don't remember what it's for anymore. They just do it because they do it every year. And at some point, that barbecue just needed to have ended. Mm-hmm. And the only reason they keep it going is because it raises money. Well, what is it raising money for? We don't know. We figured that out later. But at the same time, that barbecue takes the resources of the church, takes volunteers away from other ministries, and it might generate financial resources, but it takes the energy resource of the church, and it diverts it in unhealthy ways. So sometimes you have to look at your one way to do this, to say things have a beginning and an end and to let things go, is to make sure that when you're doing your calendaring in your church, that it's an intentional meeting to say, what are we called to do this year that helps our church go where we are called to go, rather than what most churches do, which is to open up last year's calendar and say, where are we going to put everything that we did last year on this year's calendar?
Yep.
Having that intentional question to ask, what are the things that we feel called to do this year, and to allow ourselves permission to say some of these things that we did last year, we might not be called to do this year, and that's okay.
And one thing I discovered once was, I don't think I've told the story yet. I was doing part of a fish fry, very similar thing. Every year they have a fish fry. They're known for the fish fry. Everybody's known for the fish fry. They have a system for the fish fry. The same people who have, for the last 20 years, had always done the fish fry. There was somebody that did the biscuits, and they had their special. They had their little spot, and there's somebody who did the sausage, and there was somebody who did the eggs, and there was somebody who did the pancakes, somebody who did the bake. It was a machine, and it worked the same way. And then I watched a younger guy in his 40s ask one of the people doing the biscuits, "Can I?" No. This is I got this. This is what I do. Right?
The system.
And you know what? He left that kitchen, and I never saw him again.
Yep.
And I was just like, wow. And I realized allowing something to die gives the same group plus an opportunity that can't be duplicated if that thing keeps going. So I think there's value completely in itself of stopping something. Even if you have to restart it, even if you want to restart it. The whole concept of letting something stop for a minute.
Yeah.
Lay fallow. Have Sabbath. Whatever, whatever thing you want to have. But that's not how we're wired, right? That's not how we're like, go.
Well, and
We
I was
take a
saying
year
too,
off, then nobody will come next year.
well, I was saying too, like in my previous appointment, there was just so much anxiety about even the thought. I mean, I had a few people ask me like, "Hey, have you ever thought about starting a church?" No, 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 I can't. I'm at an appointment right now. I can't even think about that because if I leave, what'll happen? You know.
Yeah.
Have you thought about going to a different church and getting a different experience? No, 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 I can't. Like I can't worry about my personal growth. I've got to make sure that this church is, you know what I mean? But as someone who's preparing to be an elder in United Methodist Church, I need to get comfortable with the idea that I'm not going to be there forever. You know what I mean? There is a set time, you know, and circumstances change things, but there is going to be an end time. I am not going to stay at one church forever. And, you know, I know a lot of people struggle with that. I know a lot of different denominations look at that as something difficult and weird. But I see beauty in the fact that we have an opportunity to empower our congregations. We have an opportunity to let go and let God do what God is going to do. And we have an opportunity to share our gifts the way that we are specifically gifted and specifically wired. And someone else has an opportunity to come in and share how they are specifically gifted and share how, you know, and through that, you know, being a member of Assurance for so long and being able to serve with so many different pastors has certainly blessed me. And I would love for every church to have that opportunity to be blessed by different pastors who are called to different, you know, different things. And so, but I think, the way our system is in general as elders in the United Methodist Church says that there is an end. And I think personally, I approach things differently. I'm thinking, what's the end goal for me? Because I'm not going to be here forever, and we got to get to it now because I'm not going to be here forever. You know, let's fail and fail quickly because I'm not going to be here forever.
Ooh, I like it.
You know what I mean?
Let's fail and fail quickly. I got to write that one down. Wait a minute. Hold on.
Yeah, let's fail quickly. Let's learn what we can learn from our failures and get this going because we don't have time to, you know, to sit around and do that. Dan, do you have a strangely heartwarming for us today?
Thinking about a time that felt like a death, maybe not felt like it didn't feel like a resurrection or a resurrection miracle at the time. I go back to, again, formative years, 10th grade. I'd grown up in that Central Florida area, was familiar with it, liked it, was comfortable, and my parents came to me one day and said, "We're moving to the Panhandle." And I said, "No, I'm not moving to the Panhandle."
I wouldn't either.
Yeah, I mean that for a teenager, that's kind of like a death. You're losing your friends,
Yeah. Yep.
losing all of your connections, the place where you live. It feels like a death. And so I said no. And a few months later, we moved. I didn't win that. So we moved. We went to this new place, Crestview, Florida, and we moved in the middle of the school year. New school. I started, went through in my classes first thing in the morning with one class, second class, third class, then lunch. And I made it through the first three classes okay. Didn't feel bad. But when I went to lunch and went through the lunch line and walked into the cafeteria, there's hundreds of kids, but I had never felt so alone.
Yeah.
And that's when it really hit me that this is something very different. And another student tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, are you the new kid in biology?" And I said, "I guess I am." And he invited me to go sit at his table.
No
His name was,
way.
his name
Wow.
was Brian. At that table, I can remember it. There was David and Jamie and Beth and Tony. I remember that
What a
table.
memory.
And um, I remember that table. We had a blast. It was great. And I sat with them all week long in my first week. We get around to uh, Sunday, and my parents say, "We're going to go to church." And I said, "Yes, this sounds good. I'll go to church." And then they said, "And we're going to Sunday school." And I said, "No." See, you go to church, you can be anonymous.
Yep.
You go to Sunday school, you have to talk to people, and I did not want to do that. So I said no, I refused. And a few minutes later, I was at the Sunday school door. I didn't win that one either. And I opened up the door, and there was my lunch table.
Oh, you're gonna make me cry.
And me too. Uh, they made a place for me immediately. I joined the youth group. I was doing a fundraiser for a youth trip that afternoon. I would become president of that youth group the next year. And that is what caused the holy discomfort in aerospace engineering and started that whole thing. So that felt like a death, but it was really a resurrection living into my calling. And I had no idea at the time.
I love that. I love that. That is strangely heartwarming. I like that a lot.
That is strangely heartwarming. That's right.
So Dan,
Worthy
you've
of
been
the title.
yeah, you've been doing the DS thing. You know, in the United Methodist Church, we like using acronyms. You've been doing the district superintendent thing for some time now.
Indeed.
Like I said earlier, kind of shepherding myself and our congregation through what was a difficult time of death for us, dealing with this young local pastor who's like, are you sure? Like, are you sure that I should be going here? Should I stay here? Should I do this? Should I, and not only helping us navigate that, you and Rob Hutchinson, who was the director of church development at the time, not only helping us kind of navigate that, but doing that during a season of disaffiliation and, taking that our specific context on, which was a unique context in and of itself. It's a congregation unto itself, but it's a part of another church, like the complexities of all of that. You've seen a lot, and you've seen churches clench their fists around the past like it's the only thing that's keeping them alive. What do you say to pastors? And I know a little bit of what you've said, because you would say, because you've said it to me already, but what do you say to pastors and lay people who are staring down the barrel of change and feeling like it's a funeral?
Yeah, when you're at that point where change feels like a death is coming, I ask a question. And my question is, what legacy do you want to leave?
Mm-hmm.
And in your case, Jesse, think about all the good things that have happened. A new worship service has started through your ministry. The building, that campus, was given to a new church plant that's now continuing to move. That was a gift. And a gift from a predominantly Caucasian church, white church, to a predominantly black church. There are some just amazing pieces to your story that is a legacy that your church plant, your campus plant, has left for future generations. So even in that death, in that ending, there were several new beginnings. New life sprouted from that. And so my question to churches in that situation is, what is your legacy? And it's an important question, and it's an important question to ask before you get to that final death rattle. Because the earlier your church can recognize that it's on its way to an ending, and every church has a life cycle, a beginning and an end. Even the best churches in the Bible, my favorite's the one in Acts chapter 11 in Antioch. I've studied that one quite a bit. Barnabas goes out there, loves it. It's the first church that reaches Gentiles. It is the first time the Bible refers to a group of people as Christians. That's the church I want to go and worship. I really want to go there. It's the church that the Bible said was doing everything right. But I can't go there because at some point it closed. Every church has a life cycle.
That's right.
And the earlier you recognize it, the better the legacy you can leave.
Say it again.
The earlier you recognize it, the better the legacy you can leave, because you can have some intentionality to it. The further you get toward death, the less intentional you can be about what happens during that closure. So there's all sorts of things. Buildings become in disrepair from deferred maintenance. So it becomes more difficult to pass that on to a new group or new ministry, to let something new be birthed there. People get scattered as you go into decline. It's better to uh, create an intentional movement while you still have people gathered. There's all sorts of reasons why having that conversation early is good. And if you had Beth Chrisman on last week, she wrote a great resource that is called Choosing the Faithful Path. And that resource helps churches have these kind of conversations about, do we start a new life cycle? Can we revitalize? Or is it time to have these legacy conversations about ending our life cycle so that new things can begin?
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. We'll make sure that we include that in our show notes. I think we're good to head into our final segment, if you will. Dan, you and I have probably talked a long, long time ago about epic fails and about how sometimes our failures, not sometimes, all the time, the things that we fail at teach us some of our biggest lessons, for sure. We can't resurrect what we're too afraid to bury. So we love to step into this part of the show where we talk about failure, the glorious, the messy, the teach you something type of failure. I think John's got a good story to kind of kick us off. But while John's doing that, if you've got one, Dan, that would be fantastic too. John, take it away.
Yeah, I was a part of a church, and I've been part of so many now that I can say it in the past now, and you don't know where it was. And we were having one of those difficult conversations. Y'all have probably sat in the meetings and the conference and the committees, and just difficult, hard conversations about the future and what's it going to look like. And somebody came in that had never been there before, so they weren't a part of leadership, but they wanted to say something, and so I said, okay. And they laid out for me I'll never forget a word of it. For me, a stark perspective that I had never thought people really had. And that was, essentially, I was rocking the boat. And they have enough money at this point so that roughly age-wise, everybody there can get buried, and the last person can lock the doors on their way out. And I remember I wasn't disheartened. It was like an out-of-body experience. I kind of looked around for a minute. I was like, oh, this is something that's shared. Like, you could see that everybody kind of just generally like, yes, we just need to keep the doors open as long as humanly possible until the ceiling falls. And I was like, oh, I've been misreading. It was one of those moments where I was like, this makes so much more sense as to so many conversations we've had and so many feelings that have been shared. I didn't know this. And I was never disheartened by it. But it was certainly an epic fail on my part, because I had not gotten that at all from any of them until that moment. And it had been at least a good year, of meetings and talks and sermons and and I was stunned.
So what you're saying is that they already had this plan in mind.
Oh, yeah.
That they were going to last just as long as, it takes for the last person there to die.
That's right.
And wow, that's an interest. And I guess they didn't matter what pastor they got.
They'd be happy or not happy with pastors, but that was irrelevant to the end goal. Yeah, it was. Never forget that.
Yeah, that's I guess that's part of the reason why that first year is so important.
Yeah, I dive in a little deeper now. I got to be honest. I get my hands dirty much faster than I used to. In those first couple meetings, I kind of like, all right, guys, where are we? How fearful are we? Are we hopeful? What's happening here? Epic fail on my part.
Dan, do you have one? You don't have to, but it would be.
I do have a favorite fail story that I've shared here or there. And it goes back to, I had the opportunity to work with a church plant in Gulf Breeze, Florida. I was on staff there, and uh, we were having our worship meeting, and I just had this vision. Um, I had this vision to because we were coming up on Easter, we're talking about Jesus as the Good Shepherd. My vision was that we should have sheep running around in the sanctuary during this uh, sermon, and it just seemed like a good idea. People try to talk me out of it, saying that sheep are stinky, they poop a lot, and
That's true.
very true. But we had rubber floors,
Hmm.
and we had scoopers ready to go. We were prepared for this,
There you go.
and so church is going on, and we let 4 sheep out into the sanctuary, running around, and the idea was we would just let them go free during the
Love
message.
this so much.
And it was really cute. The sheep were going around, kids were reaching out and petting the sheep.
Yeah.
Everything seemed like it was going well. The scoopers were doing their job and keeping things clean. But one sheep became a little affectionate, or a lot affectionate, with the other sheep, and would not be dissuaded.
That's one way of
And
putting it.
right, I'm trying to make this a PG story.
Yes.
But parents had to have conversations with their children that night. We had to usher the one sheep out, and then the rest of them soon after. But that was not something we saw coming. And so we had to issue an apology, help parents with ideas of
Oh my
what to tell their
goodness.
children. I mean, it was that bad.
Oh my
So
goodness.
so yeah, that was a fail, and I had to let go of the vision then. Any future vision, you will not see me work with live animals during sermons anymore. That was it for me.
Well,
That was
see, there's
25
wisdom
years
there. He
ago.
learned.
I let
Nope.
that vision go.
Too unpredictable.
Yep. Like I
You
said,
That's
know, there's
right.
too many things I don't know.
I feel
I
like the
thought
bigger
that
the. Go ahead.
yeah, I thought that I had all the bases covered, that I'd thought of everything, that I could, people were telling me this is not a good idea, and I thought, well, we can do this. We just have to get ahead of all of those issues, and we can figure this out. I did not have that one figured out.
It's funny. I love that. I love that. Yeah, I think the bigger the fail, the bigger the lesson. So I think that's a pretty big lesson that we learned, and I hope everybody have an opportunity to learn from that.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So I love that. So great. We wrap up our guests with something from the bishop. So last year, actually, right about this time, we were at General Conference, and after General Conference, the bishop got up in front of a lot of different people and said essentially that we were moving in his mind from a 1 Timothy understanding of ministerial leadership to a Pentecost understanding of ministerial leadership. And let your old men will dream dreams, or young men and women will prophesy. And so, with that in mind, and with the kind of the topic that we're considering now, I'm going to ask you something here, and so that you can just kind of dream. We talked a lot about how to help churches face the reality of situations so that they can live into the death and resurrection of things, have legacy and all of that. What about the churches that are a bit what I would call victims of their own success, that are still okay, right? They're still going, you know what? We weathered it. We're good. Right? We weathered the fall off in the 90s. We weathered all of the aughts, and we weathered pandemic and disaffiliation. We're good. We made it. So for some of them that will refuse to die because they don't think they ever have to, if you could dream dreams for some of these places or in all of our churches, so it doesn't matter if they're doing well or not, what are some of your biggest dreams for the future of the church? Years from now, you're retired, watching, us ruin things. Dream for us, would you? Dream big dreams.
Wow, that's a great question about dreaming about the future. We're in a season of change in the church. Church is changing. And it's not just a small change. It's one of the major 500-year shifts that we see in Christianity. If you go back to the time of Jesus and go up every 500 years, there's something that happens that causes a major shift in the way that we operate and live out life as Christians. And we're in the middle of that right now. So my dream is that we'll figure out what this looks like and that we'll fully live into it. And it can't look like what it's looked like before. It's got to be something different. My dream for that is that it's more networked, that we work in collaboration, communities of collaboration.
You said earlier when you went to lunch that there was a room, hundreds of kids in that room, and you'd never felt more alone.
Right.
And I think about how many, pre-disaffiliation, just very, very recently, we were bursting. We had so many churches and so much clergy, and yet when you ask clergy in some churches, they feel lonely and isolated. So
right. And for United Methodists or anybody of the Wesleyan tradition, connection's a huge deal. Being connected. And I think we can live into that connection better in the future. And so I see the ministry of the elder being more spread out over several communities, and not just church communities, or what we would traditionally call church communities, but groups of people who are on a faith journey together. And that could look like fresh expressions of church. It could look like messy churches, dinner churches, these networks, and also include all of our what might be called parachurch ministries. Our education partners would be a part of these networks. Retirement homes would be part of these networks. So that the ministry of the elder would be of a community, or if I use the language that we have, cooperative parish, a network of a parish that is a network of connections. I guess that's redundant to say that way, but
we'll figure out the language. Well, there'll be an acronym in our future. Don't worry.
Right, the language is imperfect there, but the redundancy is real, because when you have a network connected, there are redundancies, and those redundancies provide strength. So that's really my dream for the church, is that we would figure out how to be more connected in the ministry of the ordained elder, the ordained deacon, the lay person, all in partnership, connected together in ministry, moving on a faith journey together. That's the heart of where I hope the church goes. We've expressed that one way here in the past, and we're going to need to express that in a new way in the future.
I love it. Thank you, Dan. I think this is a hard truth. The gospel doesn't promise that everything we love will survive. And as you just so eloquently said, we are at a point of a major shift. And so a lot of the things that we know and love right now will not survive. But it promises that we will survive, that God is not done, that even when it all burns down, the Spirit is already whispering in the ashes. You said that this is nothing new to the church, that every 500 years or so that we experience something like this. But the church, there's always a remnant of God's people. The church always survives. The church always resurrects. So we want to thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing strangely heartwarming, for sharing epic fails with us, for sharing all of your wisdom as the district superintendent of the Metro District, and just as a person, and how you've grown, and the ways that you have learned about death and resurrection, and letting go of the past and walking into what God has for us in the future. So we thank you so much. And to our wonderful listeners, we leave you with this. Easter isn't soft. It's not a greeting card. It's the invitation to live like death isn't scary anymore. Death has no sting. To give yourself permission to grieve what's gone, to bury what needs to die, and to believe, to really believe, to live like you believe that something better might be coming. It's not naive, it's faith. It's what faith has always looked like. It's that resurrection. So if this episode gave you a little room to breathe, if it gave you some sort of catharsis, if it gave you a little bit of courage to let go, we encourage you to share it, to subscribe, to leave us a comment. Let us know about some of your epic fails. Let us know about the ways that God is strangely warming your hearts. Let us know how we can continue to have these conversations with you, to be connected with you, to be in network with you as we continue to live into God's calling. So until next time, may the God of empty tombs and new beginnings walk with you, and may the grace and peace of God guide your way.